Good afternoon and welcome to RCO's LWCF application webinar. My name is Deanne Beck, Lead Grants Manager for the LWCF program, and I'm co-presenting today with my colleague and fellow LWCF Grants Manager, Allison Dello. The Recreation and Conservation Office is a state agency led by a governor-appointed director, and these programs we're discussing today are overseen by the Recreation and Conservation Funding Board, which is made up of 5 citizen members and 3 state agency members. We have with us today RCO Director Megan Duffy, who is going to say a few words.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Land and Water Conservation Fund webinar. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all of the work you do on behalf of the state of Washington to bring these great projects to our state so everyone can enjoy them. Hope you get a lot out of today's webinar, and good luck with your applications. And we have outstanding staff here to support you as you go through the process. So best of luck, and thank you for being here. I'll turn it back over to Deanne.
Thank you, Megan. We have a lot to cover today, so a few things before we get started. We've got a good visual here. Our 4 grant managers who are specialized in LWCF projects. As I mentioned in our opening slide, I'm Deanne. Allison Delwo is going to be co-presenting with me today, and then not online with us today is also Haley Dalgetty and Henry Smith. Any of us may assist you, and an OGM will be assigned to you once you start your application. We would ask that you hold your questions today until the end, and our hopes is that we'll answer your questions during the webinar. We don't have enough time today to take project-specific questions, but do use the Q&A feature in the meeting to type in general questions about program, processes, and eligibility. And we'll address those questions at the end of the presentation. Also, at the end of the presentation, we'll include our LWCF OGM contact information. One disclaimer, today's presentation is text heavy, and it is text heavy for a reason, because this is intended to be a resource for those of you watching today and those who could not be here. So when you apply for grant funds with RCO, don't let this be your model. It's just a reference, and we do encourage more pictures than words, but you're going to be seeing a lot of words today. Not sure how many first-time RCO prospective applicants we have with us today, so Allison is going to get us started with an RCO overview.
Thank you, Deanne. As Deanne said, my name is Allison Delwo, and I work with the LWCF program as well. So RCO is divided into 2 grant sections. LWCF is part of the Recreation and Conservation and Grants programs. And we have another program dedicated to funding salmon recovery projects. On the Recreation and Conservation side, we have 15 grant programs. Some of those 15 have sub-programs and categories that together amount to about 40 different opportunities with varying goals. Today, we are focusing on just one of those, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, LWCF. In general terms, RCO grants provide funding for public outdoor recreation. This can be ball fields, outdoor sports courts, playgrounds, turf fields, skate parks, splash pads, and the list goes on. RCO grants can also fund the associated support facilities like parking lots or restrooms. RCO can fund trails, whether it's a regional trail connecting multiple communities or smaller trail systems throughout a town or park. We also have backcountry trail programs that are offered later this fall. Habitat areas, there's funding for acquiring property for critical habitat or natural areas near urban centers. In addition, we have programs for acquiring farmland and forest land, as well as community forests. There's a separate session for that later this afternoon. and water access, which can include swim beaches and non-motorized water recreation facilities, such as kayak and canoe launches, for example. It's all about getting people down to the water. And then there's motorized boating. The Boating Infrastructure Grant provides funding for facilities targeting large motorized boats for over 26 feet in length. And we also have another program for smaller motorized boating facilities like docks and ramps that's included in our application round this fall. Within our various grant programs, the types of projects eligible for RCO funding include acquisitions, development of facilities, restoration, and combination projects. LWCF does not fund restoration, but this is just overall what RCO funds in general. So now Deanne will jump into some specifics about the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Deanne?
Thank you, Allison. That was a great overview of the programs that RCO offers. And as you noted, we're here to talk about land and water. So let's dive in and start with some basics. If you signed up for this webinar, it's probably safe to assume that you know LWCF is federal funding. And some of the grant rules, while similar, are different from our state programs. This is why we decided to offer an LWCF-focused webinar this year. The color of money isn't the only difference. The pathway to LWCF funding is different from state funds, and our main objective today is to make sure we hit those critical differences for you. A little LWCF history. So the program was established in 1965 by Congress. It provides funds to preserve and develop outdoor recreation resources, including parks, trails, and wildlife lands. It's administered by the National Park Service, and it was permanently funded by the Great American Outdoors Act in 2021. To be eligible to receive LWCF funding for this pass-through grant program, states must adopt a state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, commonly known as a SCORP, and develop an open project selection process, also known as RCO's grant competition, which opened this morning. Washington's SCORP was updated last year, and you can find that on RCO's website. Washington's top outdoor recreation priorities that were identified are equity, resiliency, connection, and collaboration. These priorities must be used to develop policies and evaluation criteria and must be addressed when applying for LWCF funds. Here's the survey. This is interesting to see what Washingtonians, based on participation, said were their recreation priorities and what they would like to see more of. So just choosing a few here: non-motorized trails, swimming areas, pools, splash pads, snow parks, camping, hunting, gathering. Washingtonians love their great outdoors, and we love assisting these important projects. What types of projects does LWCF fund? We fund both active and passive outdoor recreation. A few examples shown here: campgrounds, water access, playgrounds, multi-purpose trails, sport courts, BMX tracks, also nature trails, athletic fields. If it gets people outside recreating, enjoying nature, it's likely eligible in LWCF. RCO administers 2 LWCF programs. Today we're focusing on the state competition, which is shown on the left. It's also known as regular or formula grants. So for formula and regular grants, or the state competition, these applications are solicited through RCO on even years. Legacy, or the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, is a national competition. This may be familiar to you because RCO just closed a legacy opportunity last week. So what's similar about these 2 LWCF programs? Both are passed through RCO and require our state to have a SCORP and require a 50% match. Both operate largely under the same MPS rules. So what's different? Legacy has a much higher grant limit, up to 15 million. And while similar to regular LWCF, it is more difficult to meet the legacy eligibility criteria. The project at this time must be in an urban or unincorporated area with a population of 30,000 or greater, and must also be located in a disadvantaged census tract to be eligible to apply. Legacy is offered a couple times a year. The next opportunity is expected in fall or winter of 2024. So if you are interested in looking into that program, please visit our webpage for Legacy and talk to an OGM. Now to talk a little bit more about funding and establishing eligibility. LWCF funds are passed through or subgranted by RCO to eligible applicants, also referred to as sponsors. Eligible sponsors for LWCF include cities, counties and towns, Native American tribes, qualified special purpose districts, and state agencies. Eligible project types are acquisition and development, and grant limits are $200,000 minimum with a $2 million maximum. There is a 50% match requirement of the total project cost. So for example, if you were requesting 2 million in the federal grants, you would need to provide 2 million and match for a total project cost of 4 million. A little bit more about match. Match must be a non-federal source. Most cases, occasionally some federal money is allowed, such as community development block grants or RTP, some forms of the ARPA money that came to pass during the pandemic. And it's just best to check with your OGM on match eligibility if you're unclear, if you have funds you're relying on and you're not sure about the eligibility. You may match LWCF with other state grants, and the best fits within RCO programs are usually WWRP, local parks, or YF. You must have an identical scope of work in both grants to match. You'll also want to ensure that all costs are eligible in your matching grants. 10% of total project costs must be non-state, non-federal dollars. And in this program, there is no match reduction policy. That we have a few programs in RCO that are match reduction is allowed, and in this program, it is not. If you're concurrently applying for other grants, so your match is maybe an idea, but it's not yet secure, be sure to consult with your OGM regarding your match certification and timing. There is a rule against supplanting federal funds with other funds already dedicated to the same purpose. And sometimes prospective sponsors are applying for multiple grants, which could match each other. So timing is important, and disclosing what other grants you're pursuing simultaneously is important. So now we're going to talk about the individual projects and just a few tips and highlights. So acquisition projects. Waivers of retroactivity, if you request that. What a waiver can do is it protects your eligibility for reimbursement should you get a grant. And if you need to close on a property before grant funds were going to be available, definitely want to talk to RCO early and see if that is a fit with timing. With LWCF, there is a 3-year future development requirement. With state programs, it's 5. So if you're purchasing property with the intent to develop later, you need to be looking at that time window. Structures, want to have a plan. If you're purchasing property with residents or outbuildings, and you may want to demolish those or retain those for park purposes. So good to talk to your OGM about what the plan is for that to make sure it's eligible and allowed. Also environmental screening and title report review, just learning more about what's going on with this property is important for reasons we'll talk about in a little bit. Let's see, eligible acquisition costs. So it is more limited in the federal program than in state programs. It's limited to just the land value, relocation if there are tenants on the property, and environmental and cultural resources studies. For development projects, one difference between state programs and federal programs is you do need to have fee simple control and tenure of the property. So no leases or easements are allowed. Project design, level of design is important to inform your project, and that will be important to meet readiness requirements, which we'll be talking about soon. So that would be cultural, environmental, and permitting. Title reports, so understanding what may be encumbering the property, what existing third-party rights are on the property. And that is important for your LWCF boundary map. The good news is costs for most of these items to do your due diligence on your project are eligible pre-agreement, and those may be incurred up to 3 years before applying. Just need to disclose those in your application. So specifically, those eligible pre-agreement costs would be architecture and engineering, design, environmental, cultural resources, and permitting. And you'll definitely need to do this work upfront to meet federal readiness requirements. Combination projects. If you're considering a combination project, LWCF may not be the right program for you. While eligible, there are strict federal readiness requirements which make it difficult to get a combination project under agreement. What we recommend, if you were considering a combination project, is instead consider a phased approach where you would apply for an acquisition grant in your initial phase. Then you have control and tenure of the property, you work to meet your readiness requirements, such as design, cultural resources, environmental, and federal permits if needed, and apply for development funds in a future round. You're going to hear consult OGM early, and I put that on this slide and the 2 preceding slides for a reason, because we do definitely mean this, especially for this program. We don't want to waste time and energy sending you down a road where there could be some red flags early on that we can help you identify and work through to see if this is a good program for you to consider. So let's review early scoping. So as I mentioned, it's important that your project is in alignment with LWCF and SCORE priorities. You'll need to understand the readiness requirements and timeline. And how much information do you have about your project and the property upon which it will occur? What other activities are underway or anticipated either concurrently or later that could risk your federal funds or create a future compliance issue? Those are all things that we're going to address as we get into readiness and due diligence. And hopefully we'll answer your questions as we go. So federal readiness requirements, you've heard that word a lot lately, and you're going to hear it more before we conclude. It's definitely the word of the day. So when applying for grant funds, you want to rank in position to receive funds. But for LWCF, federal readiness is just as important as ranking in funding position. It's a shovel-ready program, and to be ready, there's a lot of upfront work required before a project in funding position is able to receive a National Park Service award. 2 things to get your project there: rank competitively, and 2, meet all federal readiness requirements. A ready project is called an actionable project by MPS, and MPS will not consider an inactionable project where federal readiness requirements have not been met. Readiness. What's different? So for state grant agreements, those are mostly issued with special conditions, which gives you time post-award to complete design, cultural, and environmental compliance and secure permits. You have the grant before you must start the work. In the past, LWCF operated similarly. In 2020, MPS started enforcing a higher level of readiness, so special conditions were no longer allowed, and cultural, environmental, and federal permit clearances now must be in place before an agreement is awarded. It's only February, but to have an actionable project, it's not premature to be thinking way ahead, and you'll need to incur some costs to meet those federal requirements. In the interest of time, really zooming in on what's most applicable to you as a prospective applicant. So Section 106 is the Cultural Resources Clearance. It comes from the National Historic Preservation Act. And in short, the intent is to consider the effects of actions on historic properties and ensure reasonable action is taken to avoid, minimize, and mitigate harm to resources. Section 106, the basics. So it's required for all LWCF projects. RCO will provide a high-level cultural resources review for all applications during technical review. Be very complete in your application, and a developed design that's further down the road will assist the Section 106 process. After ranking, specific cultural resources instructions will go out to sponsors who are in position to receive grant funds. And consultation is initiated for those projects that are ready. How long it will take to complete the process depends on materials provided and results of consultation. So again, starting sooner with a well-informed design ensures a smoother process. NEPA is the environmental clearance that's required. So this is the National Environmental Policy Act. Many federal and state laws, including Section 106, are under the umbrella of NEPA. The NEPA process is intended to help public officials make decisions that are based on understanding of environmental consequences and take actions to protect, restore, and enhance the environment. The basics about NEPA. Again, it's required for all LWCF projects. A well-informed environmental resources survey, which is required as part of your initial application, will assist the NEPA process. Expertise. Ensure the form authors that fill out the form are qualified to assess data and respond to questions. And this can be multiple parties. It's not one person, and listing those qualifications and certifications is helpful to communicate to MPS the robustness of the survey. Documentation, any existing studies or reports that help support documentation and how you have answered the questions in the survey are also helpful. Most of our projects will qualify for a categorical exclusion from further environmental review. However, the environmental resources survey in that case is relied upon to support the categorical exclusion. So it is a very important form. Another thing to mention, if you've already gone through SEPA, you do still need a NEPA determination, and MPS may concur with another federal agency's NEPA determination, but it is still their own process, even if the result is concurrent. So providing all that information is important. Federal permits. So included, I'm not going to read this slide out loud, but it is an excerpt from RCO's manual. So not all projects require federal permits, of course. If you have determined that you need one, you must have it in hand by December 23rd, 2024. If you don't think you need one, but your project is located near water, wetlands, or other critical areas, you need a written, no permit needed determination from the governing agency. Federal permitting can be a long process, as I'm sure many of you know. And if you haven't started this process yet and think you may need a permit, your project may not be ready for this grant round. Pathway to federal readiness. So those are the big three clearances that are needed: cultural, environmental, and any required federal permits. Hopefully, all these items are already well on your radar. If so, that's great, and keep going. If not, or if you need some additional guidance, let's talk about the pathway to readiness and timelines. So budget. Pre-agreement costs eligible 3 years prior to application date. All of these costs are eligible with the intent of helping you get to readiness. Of course, there is some risk. Just because it's eligible pre-agreement does not mean that you are going to get a grant award, but you will need this information before we can get you to an award. So that's A&E, design, cultural, environmental studies, and permitting. For your primary budget, consider the application, the award, and the construction start timeline, and estimate those costs accordingly. All of the eligible costs are in the manual and our other resources. So any questions about specific items, we certainly can help answer those if the resources don't cover it. Design. How far along is far enough? So it must be far enough along to fully understand the impacts of the project on the landscape to assess environmental and cultural resources effects. 30% design level seems to be a good, safe number. Again, it's not required, but it is the recommended level to fully understand the project. Design and budget. For accessibility reminder, it must meet or exceed Americans with Disabilities Act standards. Investigate. So complete the cultural resources PRISM questions completely and accurately. This will help assist initial RCO guidance and help prepare you to be ready for Section 106 consultation. And same on the environmental resources survey form. Be complete, very detailed, and that document will assist initial RCO guidance and help establish readiness for a NEPA determination. And the title report, again, it's not a required document for your application, but you'll need to see one for the entire park to understand existing encumbrances. And the reason we're interested in the entire park, I'll show on the next slide, has to do with the LWCF boundary map. So if you're a first-time applicant for LWCF, it's important to know that if you receive these funds, it means that your entire park will be encumbered by this map. This means that the entire park is subject to the LWCF conversion policy, not just the project area or the elements that LWCF is funding. They're considering the entire park subject to that grant award. It's important to read Manual 15 to understand what that means in detail and confer early with your OGM if your park has not had any federal funds. For some of our parks, if you're coming back and you already have LWCF funds in that park, then it's already under boundary and that's pretty clear. For the map, you must also disclose any pre-existing third-party rights and any infrastructure serving outside the park. So that's where that title report review can assist with this due diligence prior to the boundary map. On rare occasions, such as the example I have showing, the entire park is in yellow, and that is the LWCF boundary. They disclosed existing third-party rights and were able to map some of the easements. This was an acquisition project, and so the acquisition footprint was this black and white. And the red crosshatch denoted an approved exclusion area. And the reason this was excluded from the map is for a future building envelope for a multi-purpose center that would not meet the requirements of the LWCF program, so it was withheld out of the project. But again, that was a discussion that was had very early in the application process and fully disclosed. So if you have anything like that, this is why it's important to know not just what's going on or what could be going on in the future with your park that you're aware of in this program. Key steps. So this is a timeline, and if you attended our earlier presentations on other programs, you may have seen a similar graph showing the timeline from application to when awards are made. It's the same graph with a little bit more detail because it highlights some targets that you need to keep in mind as you're working to meet those readiness requirements. So application deadline, May 1st, technical review, that's where we're at in June. This is where you'll receive comments back as far as any questions, concerns we may have with the application, recommendations to improve your proposal. And with that, you would get initial cultural resources review at a very high level. Technical completion is when you're responding to those review comments. Then we go into final evaluation. And then once we have a ranked list, consultation would be initiated for top ranked, ready to go project. So by ready to go, we mean you're ready to start consultation. So any questions about the APE or the project footprint, the design, all those things have been answered if there were any outstanding questions, and they're good to go. Then the board approves the preliminary rank list in October. Then you have until December 23rd to submit final pre-agreement materials. And those are for the projects that are in ranked funding position. And then early in the new year, after January 2025, we'll be submitting actionable applications to the National Park Service. And so we're expecting on that current timeline, these are all estimates at this point, but anticipating that those pass-through agreements are awarded after July of 2025. So just real quickly, and again, keep in mind, this is a great resource to look at later, but what does a successful LWCF application look like? This is a project that occurred in 2022. I think it's a great example because it wasn't exactly simple or straightforward. As you can see, there was water involved in this project. It funded in-water and upland work at Spokane County's Bear Lake. It had some environmental and permitting complexities and did require a nationwide Army Corps permit. The sponsor understood the requirements in advance of applying, submitted a very complete application, and as a result was able to meet readiness within a few months of having a ranked project. Also would mention that before applying, they were pretty far along in design and permitting when they applied, and that the boundary map in this case was straightforward. So there were no exclusion requests. The entire park was encumbered and pretty straightforward. So this is a good example, and you can use your search tool to look, and Allison will mention later in the presentation today how to use the search tool, but that's a good way to look at other examples of projects that were successfully funded. So is it possible it's too soon to apply for LWCF funds? In some cases, yes, it could be. So the design stage may be too early. It's conceptual only. The APE is undetermined. Permitting has not been initiated. No environmental investigations have been done. And if that's the case, there may not be enough information known to completely fill out the environmental resources survey. Could be that the scope of work is not yet well defined and subject to significant changes. Not enough information to commit to an LWCF boundary, which will be required for long-term compliance. So those are just some questions you can be asking yourself about your project. So key points I'd like to emphasize: meeting those readiness requirements by December 2024 is essential before ranked projects within funding reach will be determined actionable and forwarded to MPS. The boundary map needs to be final and signed off by end of December. It will be in perpetuity and covers the entire park. And incurring pre-agreement costs will be necessary to meet those readiness requirements. Couple other additional considerations that come up. I think folks are mostly aware of the Build America, Buy America Act. So this covers procurement preference for iron and steel, manufactured products, and construction materials. So the full text of the law is referenced in our manual. And any questions about that, let us know. But basically the message is that LWCF projects are subject to this law. And when planning your project, you should design and budget accordingly to ensure that you can comply. For acquisition projects, if you're acquiring under waiver, it's important to treat the acquisition like you already have grant funding and follow all rules in RCO Manuals 3, which is our acquisition projects, and Manual 15 for LWCF to ensure that you retain eligibility if funded. One thing to mention specifically about appraisals is projects funded with federal money must have a USFLA or federal yellow book standard appraisals and appraisal reviews. So I'm going to hand this off to Allison now.
Thanks, Deanne. There's a lot of information. LWCF has a lot of particular details to pay attention to. So now we want to step back and look at some of the general application tips. So if you've decided to move forward with your LWCF application, that's great. And we wanted to share some additional tips about applying for PRISM online and using the evaluation criteria. We do recommend talking to your OGM, your outdoor grants manager, early and often. We're here to help. And be sure that your project is eligible and any key dates on the application to-do list. Making sure you have a complete picture, just not what's due next, but knowing the overall timeline and the scope of what will be required of you. And also eligible pre-agreement costs, like Deanne mentioned, you'll absolutely need to spend some funding up front. So going into it, knowing that. So if you haven't already, get started on permitting, design, providing any cultural resources or environmental work that's already done that will help us with our technical review and assisting you. So the first step for any of our grant applications is really to get acquainted with our resources and reviewing our RCO policy manuals. And some people might have noticed that many of the manuals still on our website are from 2022. So the 2024 version should be posted very soon here. So make sure that you're referring to the most recent version because that has the most up-to-date information. And then also just regarding eligibility, we do have some requirements specifically, especially if you're a first-time applicant or you haven't applied for a while. There is a planning eligibility requirement for some of our programs, including LWCF. These plans are good for 6 years, and you might already have a current plan or file that you can submit. We refer people to Nick Norton, who's on our policy team here at RCO, with any questions about that requirement. His contact information is here on the screen. Also, all first-time applicants for all grant programs must submit a legal opinion from their legal counsel with their application. So if you've already applied for an RCO grant in the past, this requirement has already been met. But if you are new, we will have a template available for you if you need one. And the authorizing resolution, this is securing the appropriate authorization for you to apply for these grant opportunities, and it will determine who prepares and submits the application, who can sign the agreement, the amendments. So you will route this, depending on your internal process. It usually goes to your city council or mayor or county commissioners, the board, depending on how you route these things. It's better to get an early start on this, so you make sure that you have it all signed and ready to go by our deadlines. While there is a wealth of information on our website, we keep referring you back to all of the resources there. I do want to focus on two useful paths that you can take from the main page. So to find more information about specific grant programs, you can hover over the word grants and then click on find a grant as well. And our project search tool can be found on that top banner as well. Alternatively, you can click on LWCF outlined in red here. And you can also peruse any of our other programs that are listed right next to that. Each of our grant programs has a page dedicated to what will look something like this. We continue to update these pages as our programs evolve, so that's the best place to get the most up-to-date information. As you scroll through that page, you'll find several important resources, like the application schedule that has all the dates that lead you through from today through the preliminary ranked list dates and the eventual funding of the projects. And on the right side, there are several important documents, including the grant manual. So again, we'll have that 2024 one posted here soon. And that might answer questions that you have about the evaluation criteria, things that you'll be responding to as you prepare your application. And a little further down, you'll see the applicant's to-do list. And I personally think that that's a really helpful document because it summarizes the itemized requirements and different attachments and when you need them by. Lastly, I want to point out the grant history, grant award history section. This is where you can find the results of the grant program from previous cycles. And you can click on these PDF links and what you'll see is something like this. So this is the ranked list cycle from the last round, which when people applied in 2022. So you can even scroll through this and see the breakdown of the scoring criteria. So this can be helpful if you're just wanting to look through, like maybe you're looking to bring a skate park or a spray park to your community. You can peruse the list and see if there's anything in this category that has been successful in the past, and you can dig deeper to even look through their materials and see how they prepared their application. And then you might want to even go deeper than this. We have the project search tool, which where you can search by funding source, location, organization, and a variety of other criteria where you can select different ways to view and search this data. So this is important if you're wanting to look for similar projects in your area or the same grant program, and can click through as you're forming your own application. So one of our colleagues did this search, just searching for, as an example, skate parks. So he updated the criteria to show projects that are currently in progress, and he had that keyword of skate. So if you see one that piques your interest, you can always click through to the project snapshot, which would pop up like this. And this is all the details of a particular project. It will show the project's description, funding sources, their milestones, and much more. So you can look at their PowerPoints from previous rounds, everything like that. I will note that since we had the criteria changes for the 2024 cycle, please note that that will shift things. So your PowerPoint will be slightly different layout and order, have different headings than previous cycles. And if you've applied in the past, you want to make sure that you're updating your materials to align with this new criteria, which I'll get into shortly here. So now it's time to jump back to RCO's PRISM online application system. This is a large part of what you'll be working on in the application process. So for those of you who already have a PRISM account, you can continue using that one. But if you do need to set one up, you can complete a new PRISM user account form. This is also located on our website. We have helpful information there if you need technical assistance. And we do recommend using Edge, Chrome, Firefox, or Safari to work through PRISM. So these are the specific instructions if you need to set up a new account or need help applying within Prism. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions as you're working through it. To start a new application, you'll click on the orange box on the top left that says New Application. The next page that will open asks you for information about your organization, program, and project name. You will choose the drop-down boxes for the LWCF program and which project type best fits your application. You'll choose a name, a project name that clearly identifies your project location and what's happening there, what activity. And once your application has been started, this is what it will look like. I wanted to point out the application navigation tree on the left. This shows a lot of information that you'll be filling out. You can also use this feature to go between pages within the application. And the next button, which is circled up there next to the save button, that will auto-save each time it's clicked. So this function will allow you to exit and come back to your application anytime without losing data. So we advise you to start early. You could open an application today if you'd like, just to get things entered and started. So now to talk about the evaluation, technical review and final evaluation. So some of you have heard about the evaluation criteria changes. We've mentioned that. So these changes apply to the listed programs. So that includes LWCF, some of our other programs that we discussed at a webinar earlier this morning. So these reflect the priorities highlighted in the 2023 Washington State Recreation and Conservation Plan and the 2022 Equity Review of Grant Programs. These changes include adding an unscored project introduction section, revising the need criterion to include 3 RCO scored metrics. The project scope and design now work together to replace elements that were addressed by need satisfaction. Project support is now project engagement. And then expansion and renovation has been eliminated from the WWRP local parks and water access categories, which is a different program. For those of you who have applied in the past, applicants no longer need to copy socioeconomic and health data from the application data tool and paste it into project presentations. You might remember having to do that in the past. We no longer will need you to do that. So this is a lot of kind of a higher level view of these criteria changes. We do have another webinar that will explain these changes in greater detail on April 24th. And I put that in the chat already, so feel free to sign up for that Zoom webinar in a couple months. So this is a snapshot from the 2024 manual that will be posted soon. So this is section 4 of the manual, which is a summary of the criteria. So you'll want to review these often, refer back to them often. It's the key to funding in getting funded in LWCF. So you'll be referring to these in your PowerPoint presentation and following this order, the order of the criteria in the manual. So as you prepare for your the PowerPoint component of your presentation this summer, we do encourage you to include a lot of visuals and pictures. So now is a good time to start capturing these images, get out there with your camera, preparing the materials, kind of getting everything together. So when you're preparing your PowerPoint, you have everything ready to go. So we are now going to switch back to Deanne to wrap us up.
Thanks, Allison. Almost there. So we need your federal agreement before we can issue your state agreement. So that's an important piece, but once we have that and the state agreement is in place, your responsibility as a sponsor is to comply with milestones in the agreement and secure an RCO notice to proceed before starting work. Expectation is the project is completed in a timely manner. We ask for at least an annual bill, and you can bill more often if you choose to. So it is a reimbursement basis only. Meet your progress report milestones, keep good records, and notify RCO of any anticipated changes to the scope of work or timeline early, as in this case, MPS consultation or approval may be needed. So for long-term compliance, RCO's responsibility is to protect our public investments, so grants are for the long term. A notice of grant will be recorded on all LWCF projects, and a deed of right will also be recorded on acquisitions prior to final reimbursement. As noted earlier, the park will be subject to the land and water conservation boundary as identified on the signed final map. The site must remain open and available for the public, generally in perpetuity. We strongly recommend that you review Manual 7, long-term obligations now, so you have a good understanding of those responsibilities. And as always, if something changes, contact RCO to discuss options. Thank you all for attending today. We appreciate your interest and your attention, and we have time for questions. So one of my colleagues is online with us today, Carl Jacobs, and he's been monitoring the Q&A. So, hey, Carl.
Hey there, nice job. Hi, everyone. If you have any other questions, go ahead and type them in now, and I'm going to circle back to ones I've already answered. And let's see, I could probably... There we go. Then you can actually see me. I don't know if that's an improvement or not, but there you go. So a few questions. Somebody noticed the latest grant manuals are not yet posted. They will be very soon. If not today, then probably by the end of the week. So if you go out there now, you open a manual, it says 2022, just sit tight, give us a few days, wait until you see the ones that say 2024. Question about match reduction. There is no such policy in land and water, unfortunately, but that's because it's a federal grant program. So we follow the rules of the National Park Service. They do not have such a policy. We do, however, allow for matching with our state RCO grants. So that could be an option for you if you need help with the match. And let's see, there's a timing question of when funding will be available, starting construct, and when we can start construction. Like Deanne just mentioned, we got to get through a lot of some additional upfront readiness requirements. And then we wait. We also need, so we not only need the federal apportionment to our state, we actually need individual federal grant agreements or contracts for each project. So we as staff, Deanne and the team there, actually submit, they take all your materials, turn around and submit a full application to national parks. Then we have to wait for that agreement. So theoretically, you know, that could be as early as July or August. If we have the apportionment, we'll have our spending authority. However, it is often delayed some number of months past that while we wait for the actual federal contract. And I don't know, Deanne, you might be able to, did I get that right? You can explain that a little more.
Yeah, that was a really good summary. The best thing a prospective applicant can do is get those readiness requirements done as quickly as possible. Because then we can be responsive on our end as far as reviewing, helping identify any issues, coming back for additional information if needed. But it really varies. It's somewhat hard to predict. I think saying expect that you won't be able to start construction until after you're under agreement, July 2025, best case, and it could be later. It just really depends on how does the Section 106 consultation go? Is there any additional work that's required? Do you get your categorical exclusion under NEPA? Or in some cases, it's rare, but sometimes environmental assessment could be required depending on what's known about the property and what additional work may be required. But yeah, I think you said it very well, Carl. I'm not sure I added anything.
Okay, good. So hopefully that makes sense to folks. Excuse me, there's a question about the authorizing resolution. Can we use the one that RCO has posted on the web? And yes, please do use that if you can. Now, some jurisdictions require their own format, whatever, for your city council, county council, whomever. That's okay too, but you do need to copy and paste all of the same language out of our resolution. You may need to add your own, whereases and therefores, but you do have to have all that same language in the application authorization. There's a project here on the Snohomish that's already working away on their core permit, which is excellent. And they hope to have that next spring. So that's huge. That'll get you, if you already know you're gonna need a core permit, do reach out, do get started on that process. The other piece is to see if the Corps will include the entire scope of work in their undertaking, which means they will then handle NEPA, Section 106, and any other federal requirements like ESA, endangered species. Sometimes they don't. If it's a larger project that has in-water work component and upland components, they may split it and only cover their in-water piece. But it is good to, anyway, reach out, get started early, and glad that applicant is looking at that already.
Yes, and just to add to that is really good news to hear that. And I mentioned it in the presentation, but just to reiterate that MPS does do its own separate NEPA process, but they can definitely consider the results of another federal agency, especially when it's been permitted. So it gets us that much further along that work has been done. So disclosing all those details in your application is super helpful.
Right. Okay, another question rolled in. If you already have completed cultural survey, SEPA and NEPA for the project site for another phase of the project, do you need a separate process for this phase? And the answer, I think, would be maybe. If that cultural resource survey included the entire property, that piece may be entirely cleared, even though if the phases are in two different pieces of the property. And then similarly with SEPA NEPA. But if those activities, those actions did not include the scope of work, you're going to need to do that now for this, phase 2 or 3 or wherever you're at.
Yes, and I would just add to that. So certainly starting with the scope of work, does it include the scope of work for the project for which you're seeking funds? And then just keeping in mind that that's good information that we would review as part of our own internal RCO review for cultural resources and environmental, and would share that with MPS. And so there could be concurrence with that, or additional work may be required. So it's not a guarantee, but it's always good. The more information that you have, and if you have those federal determinations already or state level determinations, that is getting us just that much closer to readiness. I just want to be sure that no one interprets that to like, oh, I'm good. I've already got this, because it still has to be evaluated under the current project, the rules under which we're operating. I'm not sure of the age of the survey or what level was done, and the recommendations could be different for this project and this funding request.
Right, thanks, Deanne. One more question, and if there are any more, go ahead and type them in. And so this is, if we partner with a local land trust and they have either received or purchased a plot of land, can you partner with them to count their acquisition as match? The answer is no, unless they have received a waiver. Well, no, actually, land Are land trusts
Land
eligible?
trusts
They're not
are not
eligible. No,
eligible.
so land trusts are not eligible, so that would not be eligible. However, they could, if they wanted to, donate some or all of that property to your jurisdiction. That could then be included, as match. Or part of the project, but yeah, so I'd say reach out to your grant manager to work through the details. You know, Deanne explained some of the complications there. If, you know, if combination projects, while eligible, are quite challenging with the timing and readiness issues in land and water. But there may be an option there for just an acquisition only grant if, you know, you could purchase it from the land trust as well, because they are not an eligible sponsor in
Right.
this program. So. That is all at the moment. Anything else? Throw it in there. Not seeing any other questions.
Okay, well, just a reminder to folks, so the four faces that you're looking at on your screen right now, these are our specialized team of LWCF grants managers. The territories somewhat shift, but in the beginning, any of us can help you with your questions. All of our contact information is there, and then once you apply, you'll be assigned to one of the four of us for your project moving forward. So if there's no additional questions, I'd just like to thank you again for attending, and we look forward to working with anyone who is still interested in moving forward with LWCF. We'd love to talk with you about your project. Thank you.